Looking back, I think what inspired me to make the film really has to do with the death of my parents. My parents died some years ago now, and you realise after a little while how little you remember about their lives. Obviously I remember a lot about them when they were alive, but the stories they used to tell me, particularly about wartime, you sort of have these slightly vague memories, and you wish you'd listened more. And I've had an interest in oral history for quite a while. For 6 or 7 years now I've been sitting down with a video camera on a tripod and recording the stories of our older generation, particularly the war generation. I fell in with this group from Burma, the men who fought in Burma, and one thing just led to the other. I interviewed 4 or 5 of them and started to think, well, maybe there's more in this than just the idea of creating an oral history video archive. And so For Your Tomorrow was born, really out of the strong urge to record their stories in the first place. This generation is not going to be with us for terribly much longer, bless them. Sadly, some of my subjects have died since I've interviewed them, and therefore the value of their testimony is just priceless, really. So it was born out of a need to record their stories for future generations and for the generations whose freedom they fought for, and that's us. The biggest challenges, apart from persuading the men to talk, because bear in mind a lot of these men hadn't said anything to anybody for over 60 years. Some of the men, in fact, told me that I was the first person to hear some of these tales. Not even their wife or their children, their wives or children had heard these stories. And so, I mean, that was a privilege for a start, and I guess that was one of the biggest challenges, and I suppose you have to gain people's confidence and trust, and hopefully I did that, by the end of the process. If anybody is watching who's looking at directing any kind of similar project, always leave the camera running, because you might interview somebody for a couple of hours and you've finished, and then you say thanks very much, you switch the camera off and the mic's off, you're putting everything away, and then the best stories come out. And I would say just don't turn the camera off, leave it on, keep chatting, have a cup of tea, and just see what comes. I think one of the biggest challenges was deciding a structure, because this was an oral history project initially. I recorded about 80 hours of stories of the veterans, and putting it together into something which was of interest and significance to people other than just people who were interested in the war and in shots, frankly, of old men talking. Broadening the appeal of this film was a challenge. You're looking to create something which takes the viewer to a place that he or she wouldn't have gone to if they hadn't seen the film. So it's got to be interesting, it's got to kind of stimulate the mind a little bit, and trying to do that. And I knew there was something to do with the intergenerational aspect that we wanted to bring into it, but I wasn't quite sure how we did that. So that was a real challenge, and giving it a structure. And of course the other thing is, well, what do you cut out? Because you've got an awful lot of good stories, and you have to be quite brutal, and that's where Paul Orenland came in. I mean, Paul did a fantastic job. He's a fantastic editor. He came up from New Zealand to do this for me, and I'm tremendously grateful for the extra element that he brought to it. My relationship with the men was very good, and still is very good, and I think will be for as long as possible. Yeah, with a little help from the Rotary Club and the local newspaper, the Express and Star, we launched an appeal and raised £3,000 for this little epitaph here, which has the Kohima epitaph on it. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. and that means everything. Means a lot anyway to the men. Norman Chater, who was their chairman at the time, the group's chairman, he was in a critical state in hospital, and he managed to get out of hospital and come and see the unveiling of this, and I think it was the last time he came out of hospital before he sadly passed away. So you know, it obviously meant a lot to him and to the other fellas. The stories did affect me. I was surprised how much they did. I hadn't allowed for that really, and yes, I think if you sit and listen to someone for a couple of hours, and you know, particularly if they get upset, it can be quite affecting. And I think, you know, having heard what they went through back in the 40s in the Burma conflict, I think you know, we can do nothing but respect them really. I hope the film makes people think, and it makes people value this generation in the few years, the few moments that we still have that live connection with them. The First World War veterans have all died now. They've all gone. That generation is no longer with us, and they are history. And if people can think more about valuing this generation whilst they're around, I mean, my bonnet has been about the Burma men, the forgotten army, you know, undersupplied, in terrible conditions, and largely ignored by a public at home back then and in the war and in the post-war years. But you know, this generation generally need to be valued. I'd like the interview footage to be preserved. As I said, I've got about 80 hours of interview footage, I think, and maybe 20 hours of other footage. Possibly a local archive, or if there's some storytelling archive somewhere who's interested, then they can contact me. My thoughts at the moment is that they will probably go into the local archives in Wolverhampton or the Black Country for, you know, future generations. Maybe some students sometime in the future will do a research project on this particular bit of oral history. So yeah, that's my hope. I actually think it's very good. I would say that, but you know, I'm very proud of it, and it's achieved a couple of things. It's preserved the stories, so we've got the sort of you know, the value has been encapsulated, and we also have created something, I think, which makes people think, and you know, talks about an intergenerational communication, coupling between the generations, and that's something I wanted to do. It's been a project which has kind of meandered for about 5 years, maybe even 6, and at times I got pretty frustrated with where I wondered where it was going. But I think that the best thing you can do as well is get experienced people. So those experienced people in my case were Christo Hurd from Dartmouth Films, who gave me advice, and also Paul Orenland, who's edited and shot some extra sequences. So I think that's what I would say to people. But it's been a great experience, and if anyone out there is thinking of doing something, we're in the home movie making generation really, and it's very easy to go out with very little budget these days and just start shooting. And if you've got an idea, then go out and shoot it. But other than that, thanks for buying the DVD, if that's what you've done.